I'd like to introduce Eileen McKusick.
Wait, McKusick, like music.
Oh, I like that. No wonder you're in the tone. So Eileen McKusick. Eileen is a pioneer researcher, a writer, inventor, practitioner, educator, and speaker in the field of therapeutic sound, the human biofield, and electric health. She is the originator of the sound therapy method, biofield tuning, the founder of the Biofield Tuning Institute, and the author of best-selling books, Tuning the Human Biofield and Electric Body, Electric Health. So you can find all of that in here. I do want to repeat that the microphones here will pick up every single thing around the room, a whisper, every single noise, especially the ones right underneath, like where Renee is and you are. Okay, so as housekeeping, just make sure if you have to get up and move quietly, because it's going to be recorded. And I'd like to have one of these. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
And silence your cell phones, please. Yes, there you go.
All right, hi everybody, and welcome. Thank you for coming to this presentation. I know there were a lot of really great presentations in this time slot, so appreciate your time and attention here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take us through a talk. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and what I do, biofield tuning forks, and then I'm going to share with you the latest rabbit hole that I've fallen into. And I've been a rabbit hole diver on these types of topics since I was 18. I love to read. I love to absorb information, really from all kinds of fronts. I'm very fascinated in human beings and what it means to be a human being. And especially what it means to be a healthy human being, which is really kind of a tall order in this world. When you say it's not an easy place to thrive. And so that has been my pursuit, is really what is possible as a human, what more is possible. And as you know, if you are also a rabbit hole diver, that one tunnel leads to the next and leads to the next, and you just end up on this trail of crumbs that might not seem like it's connected, but then if you're in enough of them, you see the bigger pattern, you see the overarching connectivity. And that's what I love to do, is to connect dots and sort of frame larger pictures. My first book, Tuning the Human Biofield, is all about my dot connecting journey and discovering the fourth and fifth states of matter. Because we've been told about solid, liquid, and gas, but there's actually two more, plasma and ether. And when you add those into your cosmological story, life makes a lot more sense, especially the kind of magical work with magnetism that I do in this community. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and we'll just go through this little journey. How much time do I have?
15 minutes. An hour and 15 minutes.
Okay, so until 2:45. So the title of my talk is Old World Architecture, Dragon Lines, and Sound Healing. And I recently was having a conversation with one of my employees, and I was telling her about how I had become completely fascinated with old world architecture, what we call Gothic cathedrals, stuff from the Renaissance, Middle Ages, especially these spectacular cathedrals with these incredible windows. Like, I just couldn't stop looking at them. And in this whole process, discovered this whole world that is being referred to currently as Tartaria. Okay? Now, I'll show you in a slide a little ways in that appears on a map as a particular territory, but it's being used to describe what people are feeling was a one world culture, that we see the same styles of architecture all over the world, what we call neoclassical, but also these incredible cathedrals that you think of as being in Europe are actually in South Africa, they're in Australia, they're in Japan, they're in places where you wouldn't think that they would be. And it all speaks to a very different timeline and history than what we've been told. And it hides the elevated technology and spiritual lives of the people who came before us, built those, and occupied those buildings. And I was trying to figure out, why I was doing this. I was telling a friend of mine, and she had this sense that it was really kind of sideways to my work as a sound healer and as a sound researcher. Like in that conversation, she couldn't put together my interest in sound healing with my sudden fascination with these kinds of buildings. But just a few days later, I saw a slide that brought it all together, and we'll get there. In the meantime, for those of you who aren't familiar with my work, I'm the creator of a sound therapy method called biofield tuning. I started using tuning forks in a part-time massage therapy practice back in 1996. I didn't know what I was doing, but I kept experimenting with them, with clients who were happy to be guinea pigs. And I discovered that even when I didn't know what I was doing, I was helping people to feel better. And so they would come back again and they would say, do that sound thing on me again. Like all my pain went away, or I slept better. And so over time, I developed a hobby. I spent 10 years working on people very part-time. Quite frankly, I was embarrassed about it. Who's been embarrassed about the fact that you're kind of a freak, right? And I certainly was. In Connecticut in the mid-90s, when I told people I was doing sound healing with tuning forks, they were like, very dismissive. Oh, I've never heard of that, or that's nonsense, or that's the most woo-woo thing that you could possibly imagine. And I had to agree. I had that same kind of skeptical, cynical culture voice in myself. And when I saw other people doing sound healing, I felt that same kind of snide and snarky way about it. So it was a very difficult role for me to embrace, quite honestly. But then in 1996, I discovered that there was a whole terrain around the body. I'd only been working over the body. And I discovered that the tuning fork could act like a magnet. I was finding areas that were loud and sticky. And I discovered I could use the tuning fork like a magnetic stylus, stick it in a loud, sticky spot, and move it from being off the midline into the midline. It would be loud and sticky here. I'd stick a fork in it like in a magnet and move it to the midline, and then it would be loud there. And people would be like, oh, I don't have pain here anymore. Different. So I called it click, drag, and drop. And then just go through Smith button, and I find the loud spots and I click, drag, and drop into the middle. And I did that for many years. And then one day I discovered a loud spot out here, which was very strange, very by accident. And I clicked on it and I dragged it and I dropped it back into the midline and resolved a very difficult issue that this person had been suffering from with pain in their neck and jaw. They'd been to many different kinds of treatments. She called me the next day and she said, Eileen, I have no pain. And so that got me really curious about the area around our bodies. And I started exploring. And in the process of exploring, I discovered that we have what we call the aura, or the energy field. Science calls the biofield. I come to just call it our electrical system. Anything that has an electric current running through it, which our human bodies do, right? Your heart, your brain, everything about you is running on electricity, right? When you die, your light goes out. What is that? That's your electrical system. Sounds an awful lot like your soul too, doesn't it? This is your light, and it's where all of your memories are. So my explorations of the biofield revealed that it was an information storage system that contained all of our memories in standing waves in a very specific anatomy and physiology, and I mapped that. So what I discovered was that when we have a traumatic memory or experience, our electrical system goes into overdrive, right? We feel all kinds of intense feelings. So if there was a needle that was reading out our internal state, it would get really big and jagged and hot. You're under stress. And so those experiences live on in our electrical system. And as we continue to generate the information of going through our day, it's moving away from us like rings in a tree, or like how hair grows away from us. So every traumatic experience you've ever been through is stored in your body's electrical system or biofield. And if you've had a lot of trauma, these memories hold a lot of energy. They hold a lot of embodied energy. Very often in a trauma, we go into a freeze response. And so what these are hot spots that are in a particular area in our memory bank. And what we do in biofield tuning is we move the fork through the field until we find a hot spot, and we can tell because the tone changes. It feels like we've hit resistance, and there's a kind of distortion going on. What we do is we plot it on the map, the biofield anatomy map that I made. So anybody who learns this method can immediately pinpoint the age that that trauma was generated and what part of their mind or emotions it was related to. Like there's a zone, this zone, for example, the right hip. So this is a tendency to overthink and overdo, right? Who's had right hip pain in their life? You feel like you're an overthinker or an overdoer. So this is, and it goes that way through the whole body. So the more trauma we have, the more our electrical system is frozen in the past in these traumatic experiences, the more our overall voltage or inner light drops because it's frozen. And then that creates inflammation in the body because that electricity isn't circulating, it's just jammed up. Inflammation is just electricity that is not flowing as it should. So anytime you get inflammation and pain in a particular area, that's creating a deficiency somewhere else, right? And then that leads to imbalance. So what we've found is that the way to move electricity elegantly in the body is to manipulate it through the magnetic field, with the fact that the tuning fork becomes like a magnet. So we find these hot stuck spots and we guide them back to the midline of the toroidal structure of the electrical system, and the overall voltage and brightness increases. This is something you can see very clearly in people after they've had sessions. They look brighter, they say that they feel lighter. So that is the essence of biofield tuning, is this practice of combing through the field, finding old traumatic experiences, helping that distortion from that chaos to resolve and to tune and to relax, liberating the energy that was frozen and guiding it back into circulation. And it's possible to heal from trauma, and it can be done in relatively short order. This method, we've used it to treat, I mean, really, I call it stuckness. You know, our bodies would heal if we got out of the way. And the reason why we don't is because we're stuck in some kind of pattern, and it's usually subconscious, and it's all wiring into our electrical system. So the conscious mind struggles to deal with all this subconscious wiring, but with tuning forks, we can come in. It's basically like combing, like grooming your electrical system back into order. And then you have a lot more focus, a lot more clarity, and a lot more energy. It treats anxiety, depression, pain, things like bipolar, you know, which in this way of looking at things, we don't see it as a chemical imbalance. We see it as a tonal and rhythmic imbalance. People are expressing high, fast tones. They're expressing low, slow, heavy tones. They're missing their mid-range. And so we help to just let the body hear itself. And the body is a self-tuning instrument, and it will take down itself that's too high and too fast. It'll lift up itself that's too low and too slow. And then we support it in finding and expressing its mid-tone range, bring it into balance. We're all like musical instruments that have gone out of tune, and it's not our fault. And we're pretty easily fixed because we are self-tuning. Our factory settings are for harmony. Our factory settings as humans are for harmony. However, our environment does not support that, right? You are speaking to that today, that we might be expanding and getting more light as humans right now. I definitely feel that, but we're in a matrix and a territory that's all messy with the trauma of the past, including ourselves. We think that our problems are our problems, but they're really inherited problems from our ancestors. They're enforced problems from our environment. We're actually designed to be groovy. Really, truly. And there's just a lot of forces in play that take that away from us, but it's really ours to claim. Okay, so I just want to go back and just tell you a little bit more about my 2 books, if you're interested in this. We have a table in the vendor's corner out there, the vendor's room, where I have copies of both of my books. And my son is there, and he's giving tune-ups to people, and I did a couple too, so you can come check that out after this. I also founded a nonprofit institute to do actual peer-reviewed research on the field of the biofield. It's an interesting area of study when it comes to academia and mainstream, because there's quite a lot of scientific activity in the biofield. Quite a lot of papers have been published, but it's still, Big Pharma does its best to keep it as a sideline alternative kind of thing. And, but that said, there's a lot of research to be found on it. And we're currently really working to validate biofield medicine. And so we just submitted this past week, or it might be happening on Monday. We did a study. We had 15 people receive 3 biofield tuning sessions each, an hour, at a distance. And everybody came into this study with clinical anxiety, and everybody left the study no longer having clinical anxiety. We had very dramatic experiences on the graphs of people's anxiety going down. And so we're submitting that to peer review. So not only does that kind of get out there in support of the science of sound therapy, vibrational healing, but also distance healing as well, because it was done in 2020 and everybody was at home. So we're just advancing the scientific understanding of that. It bothers me, quite frankly, the dismissal of what we all know is real as pseudoscientific, as snake oil, as nonsense, as crazyville. I'm so over that mindset and that story. And I think it's really important that we normalize it and we base this in science. Your aura is your body's magnetic field. Come on. Anything that has an electric current running through it has a magnetic field around it. We know this. So why are we pretending that this is some kind of like taboo subject? And so that's one of my my missions, to just really normalize this for all of us, so that we don't feel like we're that friend, you know, who's and also to give people the language so that you feel empowered having these conversations with people. Because I spent a lot of time when I didn't know what was going on expressing uncertainty and doubt, which your friends who are jerks jump right in on and exploit, you know, to make you look bad, or at least siblings anyway. So these books, Tuning the Human Biofield and Electric Body, Electric Health, are really about just describing this. You know, your body, not only does your body have an electrical system, but the whole environment is electrical. In fact, oxygen has free electrons. So when you're breathing in air, you're breathing in electricity. It's those electrons that bind to the hemoglobin in your blood and turn it red, right? From that dark red into the bright red, because it's got light. Oxygen has light, electricity. And so the primary juice that your electric body runs on is spirit, is breath, is our atmosphere, is our environment. That's why we like to go to the ocean and to waterfalls, because there's even more electric juice that feeds our electric body and we feel more alive, right? So we're breathing in life, electricity, from our electrical environment. Okay. And then also the last thing I just want to share is I've invented a line of tuning forks, of different tuning forks. And the one that we have here is based in the Earth's electromagnetic resonance. The Schumann resonance. Who's familiar with the Schumann resonance? Most of you. Okay, so we know that it is on average 7.83. So what I did was I had multiples, harmonics, tuning forks of 7.83 times 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I went all the way up to 14, and I had prototypes made. And the one that was far and away like the most pleasing is the 12th harmonic. So 7.83 times 12 is 93.96 hertz. And it really wakes up that electromagnetic pulse and connection to the earth and our electric environment. So if you're curious about those, I have ones that you can play with in the bending hall. So biofield tuning, we work in the field. So we start about 6 feet away and we comb in. We also use tuning forks on the body as well. The body's a watery environment. It absolutely responds to inputs. And what we find is that sound opens up space and it harmonizes the body. That's the map I showed you and that. And then the research that we've done. Okay, so this is a cymoscope. Is anybody who's heard of cymatics? Okay, so cymatics is the study of waveforms made visible. And there's a fellow in England by the name of John Stuart Reid who invented a cymoscope, which when traditionally, if you've seen videos on YouTube, it's often a flat black metal plate. They put sand or salt on and then the patterns arise in that. This is a device that you put sound into and the patterns arise in water. And he's got a camera mounted over it so that he can film each of the different frequencies. So I have one of these sitting in my office in Vermont that just arrived a few months ago that is waiting to be set up. And so I'm so excited that I'm going to have the capability to study. We can put in any single frequency we want or combinations of frequencies to see the pattern that they create. Here's the thing about sound waves is that we're told that sound is a longitudinal wave, meaning as it moves through the air and it bumps up against air molecules, it kind of moves that way. So that's that kind of wave. But it's always depicted as a transverse wave, which is kind of strange, right? Like why? We're told it's longitudinal, but there it is as a sine wave. It's a transverse wave. So we get it in our head that sound kind of travels like this. But sound actually propagates spherically, it propagates spirally, and it contains complex geometric information. Also, because it's waves moving through our dielectric ether, it produces an electromagnetic charge. We're told that sound is not part of the electromagnetic spectrum, but everything is the electromagnetic spectrum and waves moving through it. It's just waves in space. Right? So we have kind of limited perception of what sound is and how sound travels. And what the cymoscope does is it helps to capture the three-dimensionality. You know, obviously if it was something to consider, like something that's bigger, it's a shallow dish. So you only get so much three-dimensionality, but you get the movement of it. And so what we found, what you see, is that many of these patterns that are created, what do those remind you of? Snowflakes, what else?
Stained glass windows.
Flowers, right? The windows in those cathedrals are all cymatic patterns. Take that in about the different patterns. Now, what I understand, now as I go into this next part of the talk and I start sharing with you information from the Tartaria rabbit hole, I want you to really take it all with a grain of salt. I'm not an expert. I don't claim to know anything. I'm just curious about all of these different things that I've come across. And I'm just going to show you things that are curious so that you can form your own opinion. I can't verify if certain things are facts or not, right? It's just information to kind of chew on. What I understand is that in the original uses of these buildings, before they were co-opted by the Jesuits, they did not have stained glass windows in them, but rather these were open portals that sound could come out. And even the buildings themselves, there's a woman who has gone into these massive, amazing cathedrals, and she has recorded the sound of the space. And then in silence, and then turned the octaves up so that it comes into the hearing range or down, or I guess it's high frequencies, it would come down, octavized to a hearing range, and then put through the cymoscope, and they produce images like this. So even the buildings themselves, and I'll show you some more architectural details that speak to this, seem to be instruments of harmony. Not only harmony, but also power generation. So I'll take a look at these as we go along. So this is just some more of these incredible windows. And then some of the cymoglyphs on the right side. I mean, these are just stunning and spectacular. And each corresponding to a particular note. Okay, so it was this slide that I came across, I think it was on Instagram, that suddenly tied together for me my fascination with the architecture and my habit of sound healing. And this says, the organs and bells would repel negative spirits. And then it says other frequencies heal and repair, and it's got 432 hertz in there. I'm not a huge proponent of 432 over any other frequency. I think that there's so many frequencies and we get kind of hung up in what we know. So I wouldn't necessarily worry so much about that. But what was so intriguing to me about this is that you see all of these magnificent, beautiful, amazingly crafted bells, right? And then this bell graveyard. Bell graveyard. So there used to be bells like everywhere, right? Every village had a tower, a bell tower. There were bells everywhere. There were mad bells in these cathedrals and these churches. And these incredible organs, right? I've got some pictures. We'll go along. We'll see these organs. Astonishing pieces of equipment. What I've learned with the tuning forks is that when we keep our own atmosphere clear and clean and bright, we don't attract entities, thought forms, right? I'm using tuning forks and sound to clear people's fields so that they're clear and bright and shiny and brought back to harmony. It appears that in the past, that these bells and organs and these incredible buildings that were emanating coherent energy were keeping order. We're elevating. When you go into these incredible cathedrals, what happens? You feel your spirit elevated, right? When you have the experience of being in these magnificent mass places that are filled with sacred geometry, the grandeur and the geometry of your own soul comes alive. It's elevating and expanding to the human spirit, right? Compared to what we're living in now, and I'll show you some examples of that later. But not that long ago, humans seem to have been living much more healthfully, harmoniously, in tune with truth, and not struggling in this illusion of separation that is giving rise to all kinds of lies between us in this culture. So it took me a little while to figure out what happened to all the bells. Can anybody guess where the bells went?
Melted down.
Melted down. And do you know what they were turned into?
Yeah.
Weapons of war. Okay, World War I and World War II destroyed huge amounts of the old world architecture. I mean, it's still going on. They're bombing Kiev, which has all kinds of old world architecture. This old world, and apparently, even I saw a picture recently that churches are still being burned in France, that bells are still being removed from these places, and probably still being melted down into weapons of destruction instead of instruments of harmony. So somehow or other, the negative spirits got in. And that's what we're dealing with right now. we're infested with parasites. And I think that the answer is in sound. You know, it's certainly, even in the command of our own voices can be so, right? But it's really important to understand what we're dealing with and how this was managed previously. This just breaks my heart, you know? Yeah. There are some really massive bells that have been made. That it's almost incomprehensible to understand how they were done. The one on the right is in Russia. Has anybody ever seen this one in person? Has anybody been to Moscow and seen this bell? Well, the official story about it is something that, you know, basically says it was created in a pit and that it was never hung up and it was never rung. But I really have learned to not believe official stories about anything, like about anything. So it's on Wikipedia and I'm like, oh, no. But there's definitely evidence that, and then they were destroyed. I mean, how they say that one was destroyed because there was a fire going on and somebody decided to put cold water on it to stop it from burning and then it cracked. But even something like that, like how do you get a chunk out of a massive bell like that? And you know, who made them and how? Now, this is an interesting picture and I don't know if it's real. It might not be real, but what this picture is saying is that this was the original Liberty Bell, that the one that's in Philadelphia, that small one is not, it's a replica, and that this bell was actually this size. Now, I don't know. I don't necessarily believe it, but it's an interesting picture. You know, what I found is that so many things have been scrubbed. Right? Google sucks at this point. I just got to tell you, as a researcher, when I was researching my thesis and my first book back in 2009, 2010, 2011, I could find such great information. And everything is so sanitized and scrubbed now. It's getting very, very hard to find real, good, useful information, which is too bad, especially on this kind of topic. But here's an organ. It's just like, wow, right? Now, personally, I've never liked the sound of organs. When I hear them and I try to open myself up to the thought that this is a healing thing, my body doesn't respond that way, which almost makes me feel like they used to be tuned differently. And that, you know, because I'm really sensitive to sound. I mean, it's my career is to avail myself to frequencies, and I know the difference. I know when sound is acting on me in a beneficial way, and I know when it's not. And I think if you're going to have this incredible building and this incredible instrument, it should be really obvious that that it's working on your organs. And I just feel like they're not quite right or something like that. But these buildings were not built as places of worship. They were built as power stations, and they were built on ley lines or dragon lines, right? I like the term dragon line. So this is the Malvern Priory in Malvern, England. Has anybody ever been to Malvern, England? It's like one of my favorite places on earth. It's a hidden gem, really incredible place, and it has a dragon line that runs through it. And so one of the things that I learned from Patrick years ago was how to find dragon lines in the environment, and kind of developed a knack for feeling when I'm into one. And so this is built on one. And because we use tuning forks and we find these energy lines, we will often go and tune them. And so we decided, since it's so easy to find this line, that we pull out our tuning forks and we would tune this line. And as we listened into it, it was so in tune, and it was so bright, and it was so clear that we put our forks away and we let it tune us. Now, we never encountered an energy line like that anywhere. So later that day, we find this very adorable little shop with a little old lady behind the counter, and it's right in the dragon line. And so we start talking to her, and it turns out that every night when the shop closes, she plays her crystal bowls and cleans the line and sends all of this loving, intentional energy into it. And it was so palpable to us. We were like, our work here, we don't need to be here doing this work, right? We can receive. So this is somebody who's been stewarding this line for decades and putting daily energy into it. And I'll tell you, like in Malvern, the colors are more vivid. it's really a magical place. And if you ever have the opportunity to go, you definitely should and to visit this. But they say that this was built in 1085. Like they had horse and buggies. Like how just the when we start to look at like the technology we have today and the incredible intricacy, they say there were no power tools. Like how are these possible? Like we've looked at them before and you think, oh yeah, how do they do that? But when you really start to look at them, especially some of the more intricate ones, it's like what we were told just doesn't add up at all. Now, I have a lot of pictures that I don't have the source for, and I apologize for that. If I had been taken, I kind of left this to the last minute. I had a lot of time, and Patrick said to me yesterday that if it wasn't for the last minute, nothing would get done. And the slideshow, I have no exception. I just have a busy life, and it was, there's so many directions you can go here. That kind of pulling in photos and noting exactly where they all were was beyond my capability. So some I know and some I don't, some you might know, but they're really more for like not to know where they are, but to just kind of take in what they are and the cymatic patterns, everything that's here. Now, because most all of these are on these, that in a minute. And let's just look at these. So just look at thinking of these as power generators, that they are drawing energy up from the earth, down from the sky, beaming it out all around them. It appears that they are all constructed to harvest the ether, to harvest the ambient electromagnetic energy. And then I guess that it's just in the environment. How it worked as far as creating lights and things like that, I haven't gotten that far. It's certainly something that I want to continue to learn. But I want to show you, this is kind of an interesting thing. I can't remember who dropped it off from you. If you're in here and you're the one that dropped this off for me, raise your hand. But this particular doorway is really speaking to me. So that doorway looks like this, right? This is all this sacred geometry. And this is about the Vesica Pisces. So let me just read this to you. This idea in the human energy field, there are energy centers above our head and below our feet. And in biofield tuning, we call these the sun star and the earth star. And we see them as being at either end of our central channel of our biofield, right? Of our toroidal structure. And this is the middle pillar, or it's a part of like being human that we don't often refer to. There's a tendency in modern spirituality to be very focused on the upper part of the body. And there a denial or a dismissal or even a difficulty in truly embodying kind of from the waist down. And built into all of this architecture is this connection of heaven and earth that happens through our own central pillar and central channel. And this idea of strengthening this, being sort of under the great central sun, connected and lifted and expanded electromagnetically. Although tragically forgotten in many modern patriarchal traditions, the fundamental and essential method of activating centers above and below the physical body is to reflect heaven in earth. So in order to achieve and be connected to these higher centers, we also have to have these lower centers connected to the earth to be activated and alive in this whole sense of the central channel. So these concentric vesica patterns, so the bottom is implied in this, right? That's the bottom part that's connected to the earth of that doorway. It's a hidden thing, but it's there in spirit. And sacred power centers on the earth, because these are all built in sacred power centers. This design mirrored the activation of the centers in the column of glory by initiate in their own energy field, opening the gateway into higher spiritual realities. Right, so that's just that sense of even going in that gateway, that that doorway, and having this higher sense elevated, while at the same time connected to the earth. Unfortunately, Christianity just takes everything up there and abandons the whole earthly and the feminine connection. So another, we see a lot of these with 3 doors and then 2 towers on either side with a big window in the middle. And this is just an interesting one because it really does look like a speaker, doesn't it? Right? It looks like a subwoofer. And that's pretty powerful. Again, just the incredible amount of complexity. Like, why would you go to the trouble of putting all these little nubs on it? Like, what's that all about? And what it appears to be is a kind of a sacred geometry way of attracting and harvesting this ambient energy of the electromagnetic environment that we live in. More incredible structures. Like, this would never be built today, right? It's just extraordinary. For that. Yeah, and we're told that the horse and buggy people. Yeah, this one says hobbits did not build this. There's also evidence, like, look at the size of those doors, right? Doors are massive. And there seems to be evidence that humans have been getting progressively smaller over the eons. You know, the Smithsonian likes to hide all of these giant skeletons that have been found. They found skeletons allegedly, okay, remember taking what I say with a grain of salt, as tall as 30 feet high. 30 feet, 15 feet, 12 feet. And right, because we understand that flora, like, there used to be giant animals, right? There used to be giant animals and giant plants. There were giant humans too. Everything was bigger. There was more oxygen. It was a different atmosphere. There were people too. People were bigger. And bigger people probably built these structures. Because why would we make doors that big? Right? I mean, maybe just for the grandeur of it all, but and we see these all over the world, you know, with these domes and steeples and all kinds of elements there. And it's, you know, looks pretty similar to the way that we're harnessing and transporting electricity now in a different way. And we don't currently get energy from our environment. You know, we believe in Big Bang, we believe in combustion, we believe in finite resources. And so we don't, and we've been told that plasma and ether don't exist, and that those of us who work with magnetism are cuckoo. They're hiding it, being hidden. Okay, so speaking of being hidden, there's all of these different ways that this culture that preceded us has been hidden from us. So one of them is in creating dams and floods. And this is the top of a very tall building that had a lot of bells in it. All bell towers, a whole symphony of bells. And somebody, I think that it was Stalin, decided to flood that whole area. So Tartaria, or Grand Tartary, on maps is often depicted this way. It is not depicted as a one world culture, but rather as a particular culture that certainly had giants, that they say, but that occupied a very large territory and that has really been erased from history. Because I didn't learn about Tartaria. I mean, look at how big it is, right? Did you learn about Tartaria in school? No, I didn't. So for whatever reason, this culture and the knowledge and understanding of this culture, which survived up until even 100 years ago, has been erased. Now, if you go to Google and you search this, you're going to get that snide, condescending father culture voice that's going to tell you this is all conspiracy theory nonsense, right? And one of the things that they say is that, well, European map makers didn't know what the heck was going on out there, so they just called it all Grand Tartary. Okay. So, but if you look at all the old maps, you know, I don't buy that one bit, you know. Probably shouldn't either, but you look at old maps, you see Tartary. And even the Great Wall of China appears to have been built on that side to keep the Chinese out. So, you know, everything that we're told, have you guys figured out that like everything we're told is like upside down backwards from what the truth really is, right? So even the direction that the Great Wall of China is facing, we lied to. So that's this idea of Tartaria. So when people are talking about Tartaria, they aren't necessarily referring to just this geographic zone and these people, but rather to this idea of a one world culture that shared language, that shared architectural styling, communication, trade, just a connectivity and a sophistication of technologies that we don't even have access to anymore. More cool buildings. Pretty amazing. You know, all of these turrets and towers are all antennas. They all harvest electricity, ambient energy. Now, a lot of these buildings, so up here, a lot of these buildings like this one and this one, they tell us that a lot of these grand brick buildings were all built in like the late 1800s. Like the 1890 to 1905, apparently there was like huge amounts of red brick buildings going up all over the world. There were like, everybody was a mason and enormous amounts of these huge brick buildings were built everywhere in this time period, which might be possible. You know, I don't know, it seems a little strange to me. It seems like some of them were there beforehand. In fact, it even seems like a whole bunch of like, if in certain towns like Omaha and Galveston, Texas, there's all kinds of buildings like this that are like the post office and the town hall. But this is supposed to be the American West when people were in like wagons and muddy streets. And yet these incredible brick elaborate buildings for municipal buildings are, you know, are being created. Even San Francisco in the late 1800s was massive, like massive. And it had all of this old world architecture. Was it all here before? Right? So this is like the whole story that we've been told about our timeline and what happened and what was going on in the States. Has anybody ever heard about the ancient Egyptian ruins in the Nevada desert? Yeah, they found ruins that are not from like some Hollywood soundstage. They're the legit ruins that look exactly like. Now, but remember all the bombing that they did in the Nevada desert, the alleged atomic bombs? What do you think they were blowing up? Also within the Grand Canyon, they found Egyptian artifacts, lots of them. And then it's all, you're not allowed to go into that part because it doesn't fit the narrative. Okay, so I guess this slide should have been further along, but it's in the wrong place. But let's just talk about this. So when I first learned about telluric currents, when I was researching and coming to understand plasma, the fourth state of matter, which is basically just the flow of electricity. It took me months to come across this concept of telluric currents. Now, when I started reading about them, and this was after Patrick had taught me about dragon lines, I was like, well, isn't what science is calling a telluric current, a geomagnetically induced current that, that flow in the surface layers of the earth? And that the electric potential can be measured? I'm like, isn't that a dragon line? Isn't that the same thing? So if you go to Wikipedia and you look up telluric current, there's a whole scientific explanation about how it's a geometric flow. But if you go look up ley line, you get the Wikipedia, you know, pseudoscience, blah, blah, blah. But I think we're describing the same phenomenon. Does anybody want to weigh in on that? You agree? Yeah. Yeah. Did you know that the early telegraph system was run on telluric currents? No. You didn't know that, right? Took me a long time to find that information too. Yeah. You have a question?
Well, if you start researching the Bar, southern France, all the caves in their neck, they're all built, all their work is done on people above in those caves, and they're all based on So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think what science calls telluric currents are what we call dragon lines, and they can be harnessed and turned into ley lines. Like you can take a meandering river and make it a straight canal, right? There's ways to straighten and harness and move the energy. And so I went looking for maps of them because if they've all, if we, you know, if the telegraph system was laid on them, somebody knows where all these are, they've been mapped. And you know, you can't find a map anywhere because you know who owns them? Oil and gas companies. Don't want you to know that there's free energy all around you. And you can harvest this. You can use this for agriculture, just putting wires in the earth and the right kind of metal at one end and the right kind of, and then all of a sudden you can induce the current and that will feed your plants. They grow bigger with electro-agriculture. We don't need chemical fertilizers, right? Between understanding sound and understanding the free electricity all around us, we don't need Roundup. We don't, you know, everything can be managed. Health, everything, through understanding sound and vibration and the nature of our environment, which has clearly been held from us. So this is just from Wikipedia. If anybody wants to understand that better, go to Wikipedia and look up solar current. Okay, so then we come into the world's fairs, which are really interesting rabbit holes to go down. So we know that in the late 1800s, there were all these world's fairs that created these incredible buildings. And I've only got a fraction of them here. Let me just see, look at this. Okay, this is in Chicago, where they told us that this was built in 2 years out of basically biodegradable material, and just for this event, and then it was all destroyed. I mean, if you look, it's like they dug channels, there's no way that this was built in 2 years. There's just no way. So people speculate, okay, this was called the White City, that this was all here. And that these world's fairs were ways of making it seem as if this was all constructed just for this. And then they were destroyed. And there are like, you could, wow, there's so many pictures of these amazing, like all over the place. They're all like these incredible, you know, Greco-Roman, neoclassical architecture style that again is seen all over the world. And all these people were brought in and like, oh, this was built just for this, and then they destroyed it. I mean, there's videos. I would definitely, like, if you're really curious about this, YouTube is the place to go. And I like to watch videos on 2 times speed. It's a way to take in a lot more information. But there's just some incredible video footage of these world's fairs. And then to put all of this money and all this time, especially at a time like these were happening when there was World War I going on, when, you know, there was like, how on earth did they muster the people, the resources, all the raw materials, everything to create these out of nothing in no time? It just doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't make any sense at all. Definitely, right? You believe that was constructed in 2 years for a fair? This is in San Francisco, World's Fair. Wow. There's no end of these incredible grand buildings that allegedly were constructed for these events, only to be destroyed immediately afterwards. Here's Paris. Like, look at that. Look at the world that these people lived in. And then, you know, this is just this kind of classical building that this could be anywhere, this building. These are all over the planet in this study with these domes. One of the things that they speculate in certain of the dome structures was that they were using mercury for power generation. In fact, if you look in the old homes that have those, that they look like fireplaces, only they got metal plates. In these old brick buildings, they did not burn firewood. There was something with the towers and the mercury and the pipe system and what was in the earth that they had radiant heat through these plates with fire irons in front of them. They did not burn wood. There is no evidence that wood was burned. They were part of this whole system of collecting energy and figuring out how to radiate. Even Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which were allegedly nuked, had all of this old world architecture in both of these Japanese cities. and they were firebombed. In fact, has anybody heard the theory that there is no such thing as nuclear power and nuclear bombs? The more I learn about that, the more I believe it. Because the people are living at Fukushima, the old guy that wouldn't leave with his cows are healthier than ever, he's not deformed, people aren't getting cancer, their hair isn't falling out. And people started living in Hiroshima and Nagasaki immediately afterwards. We're told that if a nuclear bomb goes off, that is uninhabitable, right? They rebuilt right away. They did not suffer. It's not what we've been told. Maybe. It's just another thing to think about. Told a lot of lies. Told a lot of lies. So, you wouldn't think, oh, there'd be these classical buildings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but there was. Dresden in World War II was housing a whole bunch of refugees. There was no military strategic aspect of the city of Dresden at all. It was a magical city with all kinds of old world architecture. They flattened it in World War II. It was an atrocity. They killed so many civilians and they destroyed incredible old world architecture in the process. This destruction of this beautiful world is still going on. Still going on. And then what, okay, so this is the Glasgow International Exhibition. Like, look at all those buildings. It's got all these Scottish brick masons just like threw up all that stuff in a couple years, right? And they tore it all down. And what do? We get brutalism. We get brutalism in this place. That's what we're living in. Doesn't elevate the human spirit. Has anybody ever lived in a single wide trailer? I have. The harmonics of that space is dehumanizing. Right? These are like trailers, just big upright trailers. All of that beauty, all of that elevation and expansion, the feeding of our own noble spirits, obliterate. And then we're told nonsense stories about how we were kicked out of the garden and we're guilty sinners and we're not worthy and we're parasites. We have an incredible inheritance as human beings, clearly. And somehow something happened. What happened? So we'll get into that. This is just one more aspect of, well, there's other aspects too, but these star forts. So we're told that these were all built for military purposes. These are all over the world as well. In fact, I went and visited one recently, Fort McHenry down in Baltimore. I was flying in and I was looking at my map and I see this spit of land sticking out into the bay there. And I was like, I bet you there's a star fort there. And I put it into satellite view and sure enough, there was a star fort. It was only 7 minutes from my hotel. And I'd been reading a book just the days before that were outlining all the star forts, and I'd seen a picture of Fort McHenry, and I had no idea that I was going to end up there to speak at a conference and get to go visit it, which was pretty wild. But most of them are built in water and around water, and in the cymatic patterns that we've seen snowflakes form in. So these structures are engaging in sacred geometric resonance with the elements that they're built from. And yet then they were co-opted, and said, oh no, these were military forts and we use this formation because it's best for keeping cannonballs off, right? Even the Statue of Liberty is built on a star fort. And this is the kind of places where they are in coastal and near water. It's not designed by a military mind. Right? Yeah, I don't think so. And they're everywhere. What's that all about? Okay, so there seems to be evidence that larger humans existed, other civilizations existed, maybe numerous ones. But then there's also evidence of destruction of these. So there's a couple that are noted, and one is that there appeared to be a high frequency discharge event that melted a lot of buildings. And so if you go and you start searching melted buildings, you start to see evidence of this, something like they're almost like candle wax that have melted. And they're, and again, they're everywhere, if you just start looking for them, right? So I don't know how many eons ago that was a building, but somehow it melted. Utah seems to be filled with all kinds of like weird old world stuff that's different than what we're told it is, you know? Is this really a kind of petrified, melted old city? I don't know. But once you start to think about mountains and things like this in this way, you start to see things that you didn't see before. You start to see evidence of, you know, something else going on. So another one of the things that is talked about in this community is this idea of a mud flood. That it appears that there was an experience, is that really my only mud flood picture? Thought I had more. That somehow a whole bunch of mud ended up in cities and in different places. And so there are all of these places where you see pictures of them digging out of the mud. Now, it appears that this might have happened in the mid-1850s, like something disruptive happened in the mid-1850s. And there was also a strange phenomenon that there were these orphan trains. Has anybody heard of the orphan trains? Where they all, you know, they brought in all of these orphans into America and sent them out and to populate on trains. Like, where did they come from? There was also a whole bunch of insane asylums that were built in the late 1800s or occupied these giant brick buildings. So all of a sudden you have all these people ending up in asylums, these big asylums, and you have all of these orphans along, right? So what happened? Oh man, there's slides missing. I don't know if they didn't make the transition or not, but let me, all right, well, let's just take it from here. So something, and then our whole history, like the people who somehow took over and started to change the narrative. Oh, and then there were all these fires and earthquakes, right? Like the Great Fire of Chicago, of Boston, of San Francisco. Again, all of these places populated with old world architecture. And these fires that destroyed these brick buildings, like down to as if they were firebombed. Just wiped out, you know, lots and lots of that going on. And then somehow some forces coming in and getting control of the narrative and then basically making up a whole story about our history as human beings that isn't true. That isn't true. So different eras, you know, destroyed by different things. There's some people that speculate that, you know, the mud floods were created by water flooding and then mud sinking down to the bottom. You know, there's so many questions, right? And I hope that I've kind of left you with a lot of curiosity and a lot of questions to kind of, one, question the narrative that we're told. I mean, really about everything, right? We know that we have to question, like when they say to me, there's no such thing as an energy field. I'm like, yeah, actually there is, right? So if we're told there, or even that the world is round, like who here is actually kind of leaning towards thinking it might be flat? Anybody? Yeah, so even with you guys who are a largely open-minded community, only one embarrassed hand. Why not? All right, let me tell you, anything that they attack and say is not true and shame you for believing is usually true. So why would round earth be any different? Who are the most shamed people in our culture? Flat earthers, right up there. And never mind if they don't take shots and don't wear masks, so they're really bad people, right? So I just want you to open your mind. Now, I'm not saying that I believe in flat earth because the word lie is embedded in the word belief. And it's our beliefs that are many of the lies that get between us and our realization that we're all one. But I just want to invite you to question all your beliefs and to question all the beliefs that are put to us by our culture that seems to delight in confusing us and making us think that left is right and right is left. That we are, you know, the CIA has been quoted as saying if 98% of what people believe is false, then we have done our job. So why wouldn't the shape of the earth be in that? Now, personally, I like the word realm because I think we can all agree on that. I don't know if it's round, I don't know if it's flat, but it's definitely a realm. Right? So that's where I go. But one of the things that I think that, just an example of how that is hidden from us. There was an experiment done called the Michelson-Morley experiments that were allegedly done to determine whether there was ether or not. They were set up to determine if there was any ether drift as the Earth spun through space. It was done with the assumption that the Earth was spinning. These experiments were carried out multiple times in multiple places by multiple people. The result of the experiment was the awareness that the Earth was not moving, that it was stationary. Now, I didn't know that. I came across that experiment on the internet in books, and all I ever saw was that it proved allegedly that there was no ether. Not once did I find reference to what really happened back when that was conducted and the response of the scientific community, what really happened. I got fake news. The real news was hidden. And the real news was that there was no movement. And so they brought in Einstein and his very confusing relativity to make it seem like it all made sense. Does relativity make sense to anybody? It doesn't make any sense. Relativity is a convoluted response. It's like a kind of, these are not the droids you're looking for kind of thing, so that you don't come to see that the Earth really is flat and stationary. It is extremely covered up. Good science done over and over, same conclusion. Doesn't seem like it's moving. I don't know, right? So I hope that, I guess we have a few minutes for Q&A. I could go on and on and on. But let me, this is just an electric car. It says electric car runs on air. It pulls the atmospheric generator attached to an electric automobile. Okay. We don't need Tesla. You know, we don't need the batteries, the lithium batteries. We don't need the internal combustion. It's free, it's available. The technology has already been invented. Humans have already lived harmoniously, healthfully, in harmony. And I believe we can do it again, but we got to know that it's possible. Okay, question. I'm blown.
When was that?
You know, I think it says it underneath the stop share part, so I'm not sure. I'll find out. I think it was in the question was, what year was this slide from? This, and I think it's like 1921.
Well, I always heard that Wagner believed that he could construct his music to raise the energy frequency of the people, or to change and redesign in some way the energy frequency of the people. And are you using the tuning forks from a sound standpoint in any way to align things through the sound, or?
Yeah, I mean, through the sound, through the vibration, absolutely. The tuning fork acts like a mirror to the body. So as I bring the tuning fork into the body and find areas of distortion, it will initially resonate with whatever story is present there. So if it, for example, if it's a memory where you were in a car accident, the tone might sound very sharp and very high, very urgent. And so it's diagnostic in that way that it will resonate, the tone will change to reflect the story, but then it's therapeutic in the way that this tuning fork is producing a steady, coherent rhythm. And so the body will use that to tune itself against. So it's the steady pitch, the steady rhythm, and the body is an instrument designed to be in tune. So when it hears and feels itself, it will use that reflection to bring itself back into a more harmonious expression. It's like looking in the mirror and seeing you have a poppy seed in your teeth, taking it out. When the body hears its own distortion, it fixes it. None of us want to be out of tune. It's just that we're not always exposed to the resources we need to get us back into. We're designed to be that. Yeah.
Do you find when you're working that it is important that the room that you're in have a field of a higher frequency when you're using the tuning forks? Or do you find that as you're working, it enhances the field you're in? Or both?
Okay, so the question is, do we need the space to be clear in order to do the work comfortably, or does it
Does
sort
it
of,
support you?
yeah. Well, I think that you end up with what are called conditioned spaces, that when you work in them regularly, you kind of condition them to be clear and to be supportive of that environment. And if you move into a new office that has all of the gunk from what's before, then you clear it to get it ready for the new vibes. But the beauty of doing most sound healing work is that energy it's transformed. It's alchemized. It's not like dirty energy isn't left behind, because everything is alchemized into life.
Yes. And then when you use the word coherence, that's big in what you're saying.
Yeah, becoming coherent and clear and in phase, connected to nature. Yeah. Gentleman with the note next to you.
When you drag, click and drag images back into the center, do you ever find any that you need to drag completely out of the? No.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, again, kind of like what we were talking about this morning, these discarnate entities, thought forms. I call them thought forms too. That people can build up thought forms from repeated habits, and it kind of takes on a mind of its own and then becomes self-generating, wants more drama so that it can keep being fed. And so sometimes we find things like that are better off just kind of like escorted to the vortex of light and, not digested and integrated, because they're just, it's not something that we want to digest or need to digest, because it's no longer self, it's not self. But a lot of stuff, especially the parts of self that we lost in trauma, those are the ones we definitely want to bring back. But sometimes, yeah, there can definitely be other people's energies or, just kind of lurking around, and you learn to discern what is self to be reintegrated and what is not self to be. But everything becomes light. No matter which way it goes. Yeah.
Sort of a follow-up on her question about buildings. You said you could clear them, but I wonder if there's a way, or you could talk more about determining what a particular building's frequency is. Like you were mentioning, people's generated frequency. But if I go into a building that I'm remodeling or I'm troubleshooting for a client, I wonder, is there a way I could ascertain the resonating frequency of that space and alter it somewhere?
So the question is, how can you determine the resonant frequency of a particular space and potentially alter it? It definitely has to do with dimensions. How high the ceiling is, so it's really about the cavity and the size and the shape of the cavity and what gets added or subtracted to that. And as far as, I'm sure that there are dowsing techniques for determining that sort of thing. But certainly your own body is an exquisite judge of how things feel. Does this feel good? Does this feel better? Yes. But I'm sure that there's a way to use dowsing practices to figure that out.
Well, the way that your tuning forks have the same frequency every time you bang them, I'm thinking that buildings have a frequency that is inherent,
Absolutely.
that you can't really change.
Well, right, because it's dimension related. I mean, even the Schumann resonance is created because of the dimensions of the ionospheric cavity, right? The people who say, oh, the Schumann resonance is increasing and we're all ascending, I don't agree with that. That would mean that the ionospheric cavity is decreasing, and that's what's making that baseline frequency go up. There's no evidence that that's happening, right? So, if you're thinking, oh, we're all ascending because the Schumann resonance is increasing, it isn't. And I don't think that's, we want to expand, right? We want to expand in every direction. We don't want to just go up. Just like sound does, sound propagates in every direction, right? So if you envision yourself growing, why just grow in one direction? You can really grow in every direction. All right, I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much, everybody.